It was the middle of the night in the Vatican. St. Peter's Square still slept beneath the dim shadows of low lights, while a few souls walked in silent prayer. The sky, shrouded in clouds, seemed to hold a sacred tension, as if something was about to tear the veil between the visible and the invisible. Few knew, but that night, Pope Leo XIV had remained in vigil for hours, seated before the altar of the Pauline Chapel, with an old notebook on his knees and a candle burning at his side. He was writing not speeches, not decrees, but thoughts, meditations, and intimate dialogue with God about the future of the Church and about a man who, in recent times, had been quietly growing in the eyes of the Spirit. Luis Antonio Tagle, the name of the Filipino cardinal, was already known for his gentle presence, merciful gaze, and his rare ability to communicate the gospel with tenderness. But that night, something shifted. Guided by a deep intuition, the Pope wrote a letter that, only a few hours later, would stir the halls of the Roman Curia and the hearts of millions of faithful around the world. At 7:45 the following morning, the Holy See's official bulletin published the message. It was not an administrative announcement, nor a protocol decision. It was something far more rare, a spiritual proclamation. The text began with words that seemed to carry both the weight and the lightness of the Spirit. The world is tired of voices that shout. The world needs voices that console. Luis Antonio Tagle is that voice. The declaration caused astonishment. Priests paused masses to read the statement. Bishops responded with reverent silence. Journalists tried to understand what it all meant, not politically, but prophetically. In his letter, Pope Leo XIV did not assign Tagle a new position or formal mission. He gave him something deeper, a spiritual title never before used in the modern Church. The Pope called him the guardian of apostolic tenderness. The choice of words was not casual, the Pope explained. In a world wounded by cynicism, violence, and despair, tenderness is not weakness, it is revolution. Louis Tagle does not merely speak of mercy, he embodies it. And because of that, he guards for us what the world tries: to erase the beauty of a church that weeps with those who weep. The impact was immediate. In Manila, thousands of faithful flocked to churches in silent thanksgiving. In the Philippines, where Tagle was already seen as a symbol of humility and faith, crowds gathered to pray for him. But the effect spread even further in the hours that followed. Catholic social media exploded with personal testimonies from people who had been touched by his homilies, his gestures, or brief encounters with the cardinal. One young woman wrote, "When I lost my mother, he didn't give me answers. He simply cried with me, and in that cry, I felt God." At that moment, the Church understood that something new was being born. The declaration did not point to a change in rank, but to a change in focus, from power to care, from strategy to empathy, from authority to living compassion. Later that same day, Leo XIV was seen walking alone through the apostolic gardens. In his hands, he held a small white envelope. According to close sources, it was a second letter, this one personal, addressed to Tagle himself. In it, the Pope had written, "Luis, I did not choose you. The Spirit did. I simply listened." Upon learning of the symbolic appointment, Luis Tagle wept. In his first public statement, he simply said, "If I am truly the guardian of anything, let it be the tears of the forgotten." That humility moved hearts even more deeply. The world watched in awe at something rare, a moment of true institutional spirituality. A moment when a pope pointed not toward the spotlights of ecclesial politics, but toward the ground where so many still crawl in search of consolation. In the next segments of this video, we will dive more deeply into this historic gesture. We will explore the spiritual roots of Luis Tagle, his quiet actions in refugee camps, his healing homilies, and the way his life has become a living sermon. Prepare yourself, because this is not just another papal declaration. It is the beginning of a new kind of spiritual leadership, one that does not impose but bows, that does not protect itself but offers itself, that does not dominate but loves. And perhaps, by the end of this story, you too will feel the calling to protect tenderness, to guard tears, to heal through presence, because when the Church entrusts a man with the mission of protecting what is fragile, it is because God is about to reveal something invincible. It was early autumn in Manila, and the overcast sky seemed to echo, in soft gray tones, the mystery of what was beginning to unfold. Since the surprising declaration by Pope Leo XIV conferring upon Luis Antonio Tagle the title of Guardian of Apostolic Tenderness, something silent, yet profound, had begun to spread. It was not an institutional movement, not a new congregation, not a pastoral plan. It was something much older, and much more alive. It was a breath. The morning after the papal declaration, hundreds of young people spontaneously gathered on the steps of Manila Cathedral. There were no banners, no microphones, only silence, lit candles, and the gentle repetition of an ancient psalm. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." That verse would become, in the days that followed, the unofficial hymn of a generation that had, for years, felt forgotten within ecclesial structures, a generation longing not for rigid dogmas, but for real gestures, for affection, for a faith that listens first and only then responds. In seminaries across the Philippines, professors of moral theology began including excerpts from Tagle's letters and homilies in their lessons, not as exegesis but as spiritual provocation. "Perhaps the Spirit is asking us for less control and more compassion," said one rector. "Perhaps the next shepherds will not be chosen by the strength of their arguments, but by the gentleness with which they treat the weak." In parish communities across Indonesia, Ethiopia, and Slovakia, missionaries began using a new expression to describe their daily ministry: pastoral care through gentle touch, inspired by the way Tagle approached the poor, the sick, and those living on the invisible margins of faith. It became a kind of spirituality rooted in small gestures, bringing soup to an elderly man with no family, listening for a full hour to a young mother who just needed to speak, praying the rosary with a prisoner, not mentioning sin, only the name of Mary. In Rome, at the heart of the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV's gesture began as whispers and then turned into reflections. Some members of the Curia admitted, in private meetings, that the appointment carried a holy discomfort. "We are trained to give answers, but Tagle reminds us that we must first carry the pain." At the Pontifical Gregorian University, a group of young doctoral students in theology launched a symposium titled The Aesthetics of Tenderness, analyzing how the beauty of Tagle's gestures challenged pastoral pragmatism and reclaimed the emotional dimension of the gospel. "Jesus wept," said one of the speakers, "and for centuries, we have forgotten that God's tears are more powerful than our decrees." But perhaps the most radical fruit emerged where the church has always been most vulnerable: in the territories of pain. In refugee camps across Syria, old photographs began circulating, one showing Louis Tagle sitting on the ground, embracing a child with a disability. The image went viral unintentionally but deeply. One of the local coordinators said, "We don't know if he'll ever come here, but we already feel that his heart knows us." On the US-Mexico border, priests working with deported families began organizing small liturgies of listening inspired by Tagle's celebrations without altars, where the word was shared alongside the testimonies of migrants. No documentation was required, only a name and a hope that remained. At one of these gatherings, a 9-year-old girl named Lucia held a piece of bread and said, "My hope is that one day, someone will see me." Those words echoed across the continent, reaching as far as Bolivia, where one parish replaced its traditional pews with cushions and opened its doors every night simply so people would have a place to rest. A sign at the entrance read, "Tenderness is also Eucharist." Meanwhile, Louis Tagle continued as always, simple, discreet, with that smile that never forces, but always welcomes. He declined interviews. He simply said, "What's happening? That has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the heart of Jesus, which still beats." In Africa, an underground Christian community in Nigeria, living for years under threat, sent a letter to Pope Leo XIV. It did not ask for help. It did not ask for protection. It simply said, "Now that we have a guardian of tenderness, we know God still sees us." And so, silently, the fruits of the Pope's decision began to ripen. Fruits that can't be measured in statistics, but are counted in the tears wiped away. Fruits that don't make headlines, but are visible in the light of eyes that were finally seen. In Krakow, a group of monks coined a new expression: evangelization through gentleness, inspired by the way Tagle spoke of God not as a distant sovereign, but as a friend. Evangelization without imposition, without threats, without desperation. Evangelization that doesn't try to convert by force, but allows itself to be converted by the pain of others. When asked by a journalist from Vatican Radio why he had given such a symbolic title to Tagle, Pope Leo XIV responded, "Because the world is tired of speeches, but it still moves at the sight of a single act of pure love." And perhaps that was the great turning point, to show the world that tenderness is doctrine, that affection is mission, that listening is more urgent than commanding, and that when the Church chooses a heart before a rank, she rediscovers her origin. In the next minutes of this video, we will dive even deeper into the testimonies that emerged after this gesture, into the youth who returned to the faith after seeing Tagle cry with a refugee family, into the parishes that traded schedules for embraces, and into a theology born not from treatises, but from a floor soaked in tears. Get ready, because we are only at the beginning of a silent revolution, and the world is beginning to breathe again. It was night in Cavite in the Philippines when an elderly woman approached Louis Tagle after a simple village mass. She didn't ask any questions. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "When you look at us, Father, it feels like God remembers us again." That phrase, nearly lost in time, would come to define one of the deepest dimensions of Luis Antonio Tagle's spirituality: his gaze. Not the analytical gaze of pastoral strategy, nor the watchful gaze of institutional power, but a gaze that mirrors the heart of Christ, a gaze that consoles. Tagle's spirituality has never been marked by the rhetoric of authority. Since his formation, he preferred the writings of the mystics over canonical norms. He read St. Therese of Lisieux with the same reverence he gave to conciliar documents. His study room, according to friends, resembled a monastic cell, simple, with an image of the Sacred Heart, a wooden cross, and a single framed phrase, Love that does not listen is love that has forgotten how to be God. From the very beginning of his ministry, Tagle insisted that the Church's greatest challenge was to learn how to listen again with humility. Not to listen in order to reply, but to listen in order to carry, to be present, to embrace. With this spirit, he began visiting prisons and hospitals. He didn't just celebrate Mass, he stayed afterward. He listened to every story. He knelt before people who no longer had the strength to pray. He wept with them, and often, according to witnesses, he left in silence, eyes brimming with tears, but heart burning. It was this style of presence that moved Pope Leo XIV. Tagle doesn't explain mercy. The Pope once said in a homily to missionary bishops, "He becomes mercy when it takes on flesh." His theology is not speech, it is witness, and that is why he touches what no decree can touch, the wounded soul of our people. On a quiet trip to Vietnam, years before his appointment to the for evangelization, Tagle was seen washing the feet of catechists who lived in hiding in the mountains. When asked about the gesture, he responded, "The Church is strongest when no one sees her, but everyone feels her." That incarnated, gentle, and profoundly gospel-rooted style shaped his entire journey. When he arrived at the Vatican, he declined luxurious accommodations. He chose to live in a simple house, with a small chapel where the rosary is prayed daily for the intentions of those who suffer in silence. His audiences are marked not by formality, but by silences that embraced. Many leave without hearing solutions, but with a strange certainty that they were seen. When asked what it meant to now be recognized as the guardian of apostolic tenderness, he replied, "It means carrying in my heart the names no one speaks anymore, and perhaps that is the key to everything." Tagle carries names, stories, voices, tears. He doesn't elevate them to the altars, but he sustains them on the altar of his own life. This spirituality has spread, it has inspired, it has converted. Today, in dioceses around the world, priests have returned to listening more deeply. Young people have returned to the quiet of prayer. Religious sisters have resumed making unannounced visits just to sit and listen. Presence has become doctrine, and tenderness, the official policy of the kingdom. And so, with a seemingly small gesture, Pope Leo XIV lit a flame. He showed that when authority kneels, it does not lose strength, it gains truth. You've come this far, and maybe, somewhere, along the way, you felt something you can't quite explain. A memory, a breath, a calling. Close your eyes, breathe, and listen. If this message touched your heart, comment below, "Lord, teach me to love with invisible tenderness." Share this video with someone who is wounded but still believes. Subscribe and turn on the bell. The next message may come when you least expect it. And remember, when tenderness becomes doctrine, the Church begins to look like heaven again.